Detective Norman, can I join you? Sorry for the delay, but I didn't want anybody seeing me, if you know what I mean.
What can I get you, sir?
Just a coffee.
Coming right up.
It's not my habit to sit with people like you.
Got a business proposition for you, Detective.
I ain't no businessman. And even if I were, I wouldn't be doing business with the likes of you.
The early 2000s saw the birth of 3D open-world crime games, as I call them, set in urban environments, and it all started in 2001 with the release of Grand Theft Auto 3. Afterwards, more and more games in this style would release, and among them was Mafia, which centered on organized crime in the 1930s. Developed by Illusion Softworks and published by Gathering of Developers, Mafia was released for PC in August 2002, PlayStation 2 in January 2004, and Xbox in March 2004. The game was removed from Steam at one point, but was eventually re-released, but without the licensed music, and that's the version I played for this review. If you decide to play the PC version, I would recommend using the widescreen fix, which not only prevents the game from looking stretched, but also fixes some issues as a result of the game running on newer hardware. I have put a link to where you can download it in the description below. Now let's take a look at Mafia and see how it separates itself from others in the genre.
One day I was on my break and I was just hanging out. Suddenly I heard a tremendous crash.
Set in the 1930s in the fictional city of Lost Heaven, Mafia tells the story of Tommy Angelo, a cab driver turned gangster. His life of crime begins in 1930 when two mobsters force him to help them escape their pursuers. Tommy safely gets them to Salieri's bar and mob hangout run by the Salieri family. The Don shows his gratitude by giving him some money to cover the repairs of his taxi. Unfortunately for Tommy, the people he outran were gangsters from the Morello family, and they come looking for him. After he escapes an attack, he runs to Salieri's bar for help, and so begins his rise through the ranks in the Salieri family. The story attempts to show what it's like to be a gangster in the 1930s, and touches on subjects like morality, greed, and betrayal. Mafia is a very story-driven game, and while I think the story holds up fairly well, I do think some characters are underdeveloped, which makes some of the more dramatic moments less impactful. However, I think for a 2002 game, the story is well told, and its cinematic-style presentation helped make it feel more compelling.
You must be proud.
Thanks, Tommy. She sometimes helps out here behind the bar. Thing is, I don't want her to walk home alone tonight. Only yesterday some stupid punks gave us some problems. You know, with all that dirty talk and all that.
If you're familiar with many popular films about the Mafia, then Mafia's Hollywood influences should not go unnoticed, and the game does include nods to The Godfather and even film director Martin Scorsese. Unfortunately, I feel the voice work is inconsistent. It leans towards the good side, but many interactions sound like the characters are not playing off each other and are just reading lines. The voice cast is comprised of some notable talent, including Mike Sorvino and Sopranos actors Matt Servito and Dan Grimaldi. The performances of the main cast are pretty good overall, but the performances of many of the side and one-off characters are terrible.
Boss, it looks like he's had enough. What do you want us to do with him?
I don't know, finish him off and dump him in the ocean.
Mafia is an open-world action game, but unlike its contemporaries such as the Grand Theft Auto games of the time, the story and open-ended nature are split into two game modes. The story has you going from mission to mission, and while there are often times you can technically roam around and explore, there's no real reason to do so. That's what the free ride mode is for. In this mode, you can earn money by killing gangsters, speeding, driving a taxi, and blowing up cars. And you can spend your cash on health, weapons, and vehicle repairs. You need to progress through the story to unlock free ride options, like different locations and vehicles, and you can configure things like the traffic, pedestrian, and police patrol densities. When you beat the story, you'll unlock the free ride extreme mode. In this mode, you have to find NPCs throughout the world that task you with outrageously silly objectives that are also extremely challenging.
Ouch! Don't hurt me! I give up! Everybody in! Quick!
The story mode is all about the plot. Everything is dictated by the story and you don't have to worry about money. Tommy can walk, run, jump, crouch, roll, climb onto things, perform melee attacks, and replenish health from first aid kits found in the environments. You go from mission to mission completing various objectives. Mafia is very slow-paced, and trying to rush through missions will only result in frustration. Not only does the game portray life as a gangster in the 1930s, but it also tries to be as authentic to the time period as possible, from the look and feel of the city to the vehicles. You'll get to drive and steal a ton of authentic 1930s vehicles. As you progress through the story, you'll learn how to steal vehicles and unlock them in the garage, which can often be accessed before starting a mission. The game even comes with a car cyclopedia, which lets you view all the different cars in the game and their stats. I think there's a few things that make Mafia stand out. The 1930s setting, its attention to detail, and the realism. The developers implemented some realistic elements, which is cool, but also a detriment. You have to obey laws. If the cops see you speeding, running red lights, crashing into things, stealing cars, or see any visible weapon on your person, they'll come after you. Now, unless you're violent, they don't come shooting. You have to hide weapons, not go above the speed limit, and try to avoid violent incidents in public. Many infractions will result in a fine, and if you're driving, you have to stop and get out of your vehicle to pay it. The most annoying thing is speeding, because you'll be doing a lot of driving in this game, and if you try to obey the laws, it's almost impossible to get anywhere quickly. You can turn on the speed limiter, which will prevent your vehicle from going above the speed limit. What makes all of this worse is that most vehicles don't move very fast, so trying to get anywhere is just time-consuming. Plus, car chases, including police chases, can feel long and drawn out. Cop cars are often faster than whatever you're driving, so you can easily spend a good chunk of time just trying to lose them. On the other hand, when you're chasing enemies or being pursued by them, enemy vehicles seem to crash a lot, which often works out in your favor. Tommy can carry several small weapons, but only a limited amount of bigger stuff, and if he can't store a big weapon somewhere on him, he has to carry it with his hands. And while you might want to bring all the bigger weapons, if you roam the streets holding a shotgun, for example, you're just going to attract police attention, and to avoid that, you either have to make space to store it or drop it. You'll get your hands on various weapons, including melee weapons, Molotovs, handguns, shotguns, rifles, and a Thompson. The combat can actually be intense, and like everything else in this game, you have to take things slowly. Running out into the open will often get you killed, and that could mean having to shoot your way through a lengthy section again. You have to be mindful of your surroundings and ammo. Crouching and staying behind objects and structures and slowly moving your way forward as you blow away bad guys is the best way to survive firefights. Mafia's realism doesn't just apply to driving and obeying laws, but also combat. If you reload with ammo still in the clip, you'll lose it. Plus, reloading takes time, and for me often became the most frustrating aspect of the combat, especially towards the end of the game. You're going to engage a lot of enemies in the game, including Mafia goons, cops, punks, and sometimes dogs. Human enemies will shoot at you, run and roll around, and take cover. I found their AI to be somewhat impressive, actually, for the time this released, that is. However, they do often feel spongy, which can be annoying. Headshots will sometimes kill enemies instantly, but other times not, which I guess depends on the weapon used. You can unload an entire clip into a foe and still not kill him, which can be aggravating. Furthermore, I found that close-range weapons like the shotguns are often not ideal most of the time, and that's because you're usually always outnumbered, and if you're out in the open or close to an enemy or multiple, you can die pretty quickly if you don't take them out fast enough. And it doesn't help that reloading can take some time. I found it best to keep a good distance and take it slow no matter who or what I was up against. Mafia can sometimes feel more like a driving game than an action game or third-person shooter. A lot of games in this genre have you driving around a city completing various tasks, but Mafia's realism takes things to a whole new level. As it relates to the story mode, I sometimes felt like I was doing more driving than anything else. Attracting police attention by not obeying laws as you move to your next objective can sometimes make things worse or more difficult. Objectives will take you all over the city, and you'll often have to drive back to Salieri's bar to end a mission, which seems unnecessary most of the time. Many of the cars are slow and clunky, and it doesn't help that when you're accompanied by other characters, they usually don't have a lot to say, so there's nothing to alleviate any boredom that can arise from simply driving from point A to B, unless you like getting into trouble with the cops. But in the story mode, there's nothing to really do outside of the mission, so when the police are after you and are shoving your vehicle all over the road as a result of a mistake or something you did by accident, that can often be a pain in the ass. The game does autosave after load points, and if you die or fail an objective, that means you have to restart from the last save point, which could mean you have to drive a lengthy distance again. You'll sometimes be accompanied by friendlies and they will shoot at and kill foes, but also get in your way, which can be a problem during some firefights. One thing I thought was cool, especially when this game was in its prime, is that you and your allies can shoot out of windows while driving. Outside of select missions, you'll be completing most objectives solo. You'll have to assassinate people, rescue people, retrieve items, there's some stealth sequences, and you'll even have to race in one mission. The action-oriented missions are easily the most enjoyable. Now, as mentioned before, the game is slow-paced. It will be several missions before the action really picks up. If it wasn't for all the driving you have to do in general, car chases and driving-focused objectives would probably be more exciting. Missions often include multiple objectives, and sometimes you can complete them in any order. You're often given the option to complete a side objective before returning to Salieri's bar, and the reward is always a new car. Of course, you'll have to drive to its location and steal it first, and then drive it to the bar. There's a compass on your HUD that will point to your next objective, and you can reference a map of the city which will show objective markers. Unfortunately, some objectives are not clear. You can bring up what your objective is at the press of a button, and yes, it outright tells you what your ultimate goal is, but it doesn't tell you exactly how to accomplish it. Now, on the surface, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it gives you the idea that you have the freedom to complete the objective however you want. But sometimes there's very specific things you have to do, and they're just not obvious or clear. What really drives me up a wall is the game will often let you complete an objective before a scripted sequence that would easily allow you to complete the next objective. For example, in one mission, if you hijack a truck before its cargo is unloaded, you won't be able to complete the next objective unless you unload it yourself, I'm guessing, but I never tried. And that's because I didn't know what the issue was until I watched a video. I was angrily talking to the game like it was going to respond too. You know, saying things like, "What the fuck is the problem? I'm doing what you're telling me to do." It was frustrating. Another problem is the game doesn't indicate if you missed certain objectives. For example, during that same mission, I had to wait for a character to get in the car with me, but somehow I missed that part. Regardless, the game doesn't tell you, like you forgot so-and-so or go back and pick up the guy. No, I got in the car and the game told me to drive to the next location, leaving me confused when I got there because nothing was happening. Lost Heaven is a city consisting of multiple islands connected by bridges and tunnels, and outside of the city is a countryside which, for some reason, does not appear on the in-game map. The best way to get around is by driving vehicles, but you can also take the train to certain locations. Looking at it through a modern lens, the game's age is noticeable, and things that were not really problems or were easily forgivable in 2002 are now more of an issue or an eyesore. For me, the biggest is that the city often feels desolate. There's pedestrians on the sidewalks and cars on the roads, but not enough to make Lost Heaven feel like a bustling city full of life. I also thought it was odd to not see many cars parked on the sides of the roads. Many streets just feel somewhat empty. Regardless, for a 2002 game, Lost Heaven is a fairly large and impressive urban world. It does a great job at capturing the atmosphere of the 1930s. From the architecture of the buildings to the texture work, it's exceptionally well crafted. Now, Lost Heaven is all about atmosphere, it seems, because there's really not a lot to do. The side objectives in the story are actually part of the story missions and can be skipped. There's no Mafia-related side content that you can do whenever, like, for example, gang wars, hijackings, robberies, collections, things like that. Free Ride lets you roam around and do whatever you want and earn a little money, but that can get old pretty quickly, especially nowadays. Nevertheless, this kind of freedom was still impressive in 2002. Keep in mind, Grand Theft Auto 3 came out in 2001, so the idea of being able to freely run around a 3D city and shoot people, steal cars, and blow things up whenever you want was still a novel concept. Mafia was a looker in its day. With everything maxed out, the presentation looks nice and crisp, especially when viewing things from a distance, and character faces in particular look great despite the fact they can't form expressions. Blood will splatter when characters are shot, enemies will often die dramatically, and downed enemies will squirm and slowly move along the ground. All the cars look authentic, and when they take shots you can actually see bullet dents. Each major part of the city looks and feels different. Looking at the game now, textures can appear blurry, animations are stiff, and poppin' is rampant. If you play the re-release, the licensed music was removed, but you can mod it back in. I didn't because I assumed YouTube would go crazy with the copyright shit, but the game does feature tunes from the time period, from artists like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington among some others. The gameplay is accompanied by some great audio work, weapons fire and vehicles sound excellent, and even little things sound good, like the taps of a gangster's shoes as he walks around. On the technical side, the only major bug I encountered was a car falling through the ground, resulting in me failing an objective. I had fun with Mafia, and it's very much a game of its time. I think some of my issues with it are simply the result of its age. In 2002, 3D open-world sandbox crime games were still in their infancy, so some of the standards and conveniences we've come to know and love in this genre were not yet developed. Vice City is what really opened my eyes to this genre back in the day, and it made me want to try every open-world game set in an urban environment. I did play Mafia once before back in the mid-2000s, and even then I felt it was slow-paced but definitely unique. Now today, in the sea of open-world games, Mafia can still stand on its own. Playing it now, I still enjoyed the story and overall gameplay, and while the realism was a neat idea in 2002, I think the developers went a little overboard with it to the point it brings the game down more and more as it gets older. It's a slow-paced game in general, and the realism just slows things down even more. And as the game loses its luster as time goes on, the slowness becomes more and more of a detriment. Granted, the game is from a different time, and some of the issues I have with it can be excused, but it doesn't change the fact that the experience can be frustrating now if you don't have any patience. Unlike other games in the genre, Mafia is not a game that I personally would come back to on a regular basis, mainly because of its slow-paced nature. I could come back for the story, but if I want to run around and shoot people, blow shit up, and get into police chases, I would prefer to play some of its contemporaries like GTA 3 or Vice City. I do think the combat is the best part of Mafia. Firefights can feel intense, and part of that is due to the realism. Despite the spongy enemies and significant reload times, blowing away enemies often feels satisfying and rewarding. You have to be vigilant and careful and move slowly, and it's wise to make every shot count. Dying after a lengthy battle, forcing you to do it all over again, can suck, but at least the combat keeps you engaged and on your toes. I would recommend Mafia, but you need to have patience to enjoy it. It is a little different than other games in the genre. It's a very story-driven game, and luckily the story is pretty good. Now, Mafia is not a perfect game, it has problems, but if you're patient enough to enjoy the general gameplay in the first place, you should be able to get past them. Mafia does a great job at depicting life as a gangster in the 1930s, and while I don't think it's the best open-world crime game around, even for its time, it's sure as hell a memorable one. Definitely check it out.
I knew you wouldn't let us down, Tommy. You're really one of us now. A lot of people made a lot of money on that race, Tommy. And you get all the credit, so you won't come out short. You should stop by and see Lucas Bertoni. He also bet and won a pile of money, so he wants to repay you, too, somehow.
Okay, I will.
Congratulations, you big
Thanks.
hero.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out the rest of our channel, follow us at the links below, and you can also support us on Patreon.
If you're interested in more gaming content, check out our friends over at Gamecast.